On April 9th, 2005, in Kaohsiung City, Taiwan, a young man was home alone inside of his apartment watching TV. He heard a loud thumping sound coming from right above him, and then he heard another one, and another one, and another one, and before long, all he heard was a succession of thumps and also what sounded like chanting coming from upstairs. To this young man, these actually weren't that weird, because the family that lived right above him, the Wu family, often did these ceremonial dances and rituals at all hours. And then suddenly, he heard a scream as he began making his way towards his door to go upstairs and check on the Wu family. All the noises just completely stopped. 2 days later, on April 11th, that same young man was watching TV yet again when he heard a loud pounding sound, except this time it was coming from his front door. He opened it up, and standing there was this middle-aged man named Wu Shan, who was the patriarch of the Wu family upstairs. He was pale and skinny and very gaunt, and he was covered in what looked like filth. He smelled unbelievably horrible. Wu Shan just looked back at the young man with this kind of vacant expression, and he just said, "Call an ambulance." And then Wu Shan ran down the steps and disappeared out into the street. And so at this point, the young man is left just standing there having no idea what to think. I better go upstairs and make sure things are okay before I do anything else. And so the young man went upstairs, he knocks on the Wu family's door, he doesn't get a response, and he just tried the doorknob and he found it was unlocked. He steps into the house and he calls out to anybody, but nobody called back. He kind of looked around the family's apartment and it was totally filthy. In the middle of the living room on the floor, he saw something that he just simply couldn't believe. It would turn out in the weeks leading up to that ceremony, one of the Wu family's daughters came down with an illness. And because the family didn't have a lot of money, they couldn't send her to the doctor. When she didn't get better, the family decided that she must not be physically sick. She must be spiritually sick, meaning she was possessed by a demon. And then before long, the rest of the members of the family began complaining that maybe they too were also possessed. That was the day that the Wu family performed a big group exorcism. They believed that the one thing demons were afraid of was filth. And so they decided that if they filled their bodies with enough filth, the demons would leave. And so the Wu family, as they chanted and stomped around and screamed, began consuming their own feces. And when they would vomit it back up again, they would just swallow it right back down. What the downstairs neighbor actually discovered was the daughter, and she was laying on the ground and was deceased. And during the autopsy, they would discover that her airway was totally blocked by feces and vomit. By the time the downstairs neighbor made this discovery, the entire Wu family had fled the apartment. But the police would ultimately track down all the remaining Wu family members, and they would all be arrested. However, a court ultimately decided that the Wu family was suffering from something known as mass hysteria. They could not be held legally accountable for what they did, and so they were all acquitted.